Welcome back everybody to Geology 101. We're covering deserts in this unit, and now we get to talk about desert erosional landforms. So we have landforms in our desert which are a result of erosional processes, taking things away. So let's look at our diagram for the whole region. Now we're not going to be covering everything here actually. You'll see there's some depositional features on the diagram here and some erosional features. But we'll talk about some of the things here which are caused by erosion. Things like buttes, our mesas, we have our hoodoos, natural arches, things that are a result of material being pulled away or taken away somehow. So our 5 erosional landforms we are going to focus on. Well, this is really 3 here, but they're all very similar. We have our plateaus, mesas, and buttes. We got hoodoos, canyons, arroyos, otherwise known as washes, and our natural arches. Okay, so first is going to be plateaus, mesas, and buttes. So buttes are going to be things like this that we see in our photo here, right? We have a small flat-topped hill or mountain, tend to be fairly steep and has to be taller than it is wide. Our mesa is going to be a little bit bigger, maybe something like this in the photo. We have a medium-sized flat-top hill or mountain, wider than it is tall, and a plateau is like a mesa, but much, much bigger, right? This is going to be something that could cover an entire region, something like the Colorado Plateau. So let's look at a few examples. So we have our butte here, right? And if we had to look, this is our shorter side wide, and it's actually going to be longer, taller than it is wide. That's what makes it butte, right? With a mesa, it's going to be the opposite. So it's not quite as tall as it is long. And with the plateau, we have a more extreme version of the mesa, right? So this is our short side vertically, and the much, much longer side makes it a plateau. So our first example here is this a butte, a mesa, or a plateau. Well, looking at it, right, it's going to be fairly short going across and much taller than it is wide, right? So our shorter length here and our longer length going vertically, this must be a butte. And what about this here? Well, I noticed that it's wider than it is tall, right? So we have our short side here, our long side, this must be a mesa. And our last example, right, I noticed the short side is here and we have a much longer side here, so this must be a plateau. Okay, so let's jump a little bit to something else. If you've ever been in the desert, been hiking for any length of time, you might have seen features like this that are a little bit strange looking, right? It looks like it's something that's top heavy, like it would fall over, you know, kind of like somebody is stacking stones on top of one another and put a big one at the top, except that it forms naturally, right? You can see an example here. We have some examples here, these sort of rock pillars, like somebody made a rock stack, and maybe there's bigger rocks on top than there are at the bottom. Well, these are going to be called hoodoos. So our hoodoo is going to be some sort of column or pillar of rock, and the way that these form is through differential erosion, right? So this chunk here must have been really, really resistant to weathering and erosion, as opposed to this stuff, which probably weathered out very easily. This stuff is a little bit more resistant, and then there was a patch of rock here that is less resistant, and then more resistant like that, right? We have differences in the ability of the material to resist weathering and erosion that results in the hoodoos. In this case, the weathering and erosion are due to water and wind, not just water, like you would see with, for example, the buttes and the mesas that we just talked about, right? Could be water or wind for these. Our next example is going to be something like this. It should look familiar, right? We have this V-shaped valley carved out by a stream, and this is going to be called a canyon, like with the Grand Canyon. So narrow, steep-walled gorge, a hole in the ground, carved by swift-moving water like a river, and so it tends to be V-shaped. Here, the weathering is mostly due to water. One other very common feature of the desert is going to be things that look like this, right? And you may recognize right away, right, maybe judging by the size of the sediments here, maybe judging by the erosional pattern, the sort of channel shape, maybe judging by the assortment of sediments that you have right here and right here. These are going to be seasonal streams that are only there whenever it's raining or shortly afterward, but are normally dry. And these are called arroyos or washes commonly. So these are normally dry stream beds that fill up temporarily whenever it rains, right? And whenever you have a thunderstorm, there's a huge amount of water that comes through here. It tends to be very, very damaging, tends to do a lot of erosion and weathering all at once. And here the weathering and erosion is going to be mostly due to that water whenever you have a precipitation event. Okay, so let's jump again. We're looking at this feature right here. So based on what we just talked about for the hoodoos, if I asked you how this formed, you might be able to tell me that This stuff up at the top is more resistant to weathering and erosion than all of this stuff at the bottom end, especially whatever was here in the middle. Must have been really soft, right? It eroded away, weathered really, really easily, but the rest of it did not. And so as a result, you have this natural arch. And the diagram here kind of takes you through the different stages, right? You have parts that are more resistant to weathering, parts that are less resistant. Over time, the parts that are more resistant tend to stay behind, even if they make kind of this weird arch shape. They're strong enough to support themselves, and the rest tends to weather out, right? So we have a naturally occurring curved shape, tends to form whenever you have this softer rock material being eroded by either wind or water to make the natural arch. So that is all I have for erosional landforms. In the next unit, we'll look at other things like these dunes here, our depositional landforms.